Okay, I think we're live. And I'm
Yep.
back finally.
Welcome back, Phil.
Thank you.
And I'm Riley, and this is another episode of No Cultural Authority, our first for 2016, which is exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It was good.
And
It's good to be back in the rhythm.
yeah, absolutely. So we got
what did I miss?
four. What did you say? What did you miss?
Yeah,
That would take a long time. I
I know.
feel
I'm just kidding.
like. I may have gotten carried away while you were not around.
I know. I've got some listening to do, I think.
It's possible that happened. Yeah, so this episode we're going to be talking about the 50th anniversary of 4 albums, so the 50th anniversary of Simon Garfunkel's second album, Sounds of Silence, and then the 45th anniversary of Janis Joplin's second album, Pearl, which I didn't realize was their second album until we listened to it, and then the 40th anniversary of Bob Dylan's Desire, which is somehow his 17th album, which I can't even. I sound like a young woman on social media right now, but I can't even deal with that.
You literally.
And then David Bowie, R.I.P. David Bowie's 10th album, Station to Station. But I wanted to say just before we kicked it off that this is 2016 is going to be an exciting year for me and this podcast, because I sort of view 1966 as the year that rock music grew up, and there's a lot of like really cool stuff that we have coming up this year, which I'm super excited about. So I just wanted to say that because 1966 is one of my favorite years in music history, and so this is exciting.
Awesome. I think this is going to be a great start too. Like, I think just at a high level, like I didn't expect all of these albums to be so good. And as I guess, again, which is kind of the theme on this podcast, is a bunch of albums that I've never listened to front to back, and they're all excellent. So on that note, you might disagree with me.
It's possible, yeah.
Would you like to kick off Sounds of Silence?
Well, yeah, because I think there's some backstory here, which I feel like maybe it's just me, but I feel like is important. Because I don't know how many people know, but Simon Garfunkel, they released their debut, I believe it was in 1964. Late 1964, and it failed, and they broke up eventually. Paul Simon moved to England and to try to start his career, and and then I believe Art Garfunkel went back to school or something like that. And in fact, because it was the 60s and we didn't have the distribution powers that we have now, Paul Simon even released a solo album in England, which contained a lot of the songs that found their way, were either on the original Simon Garfunkel debut album or ended up being on this album. And it's this really weird, confusing sort of discography of their first initial recordings, where there's a bunch of songs that repeat from album to album because of this. So anyway, what happened was in 1965, folk rock became a thing, and a producer, I believe he produced their first album. He didn't produce Sounds of Silence. Yeah, Tom Wilson, who is sort of one of the great American rock producers of I don't know, great, but one of the notable American rock producers of the 1960s. He produced a Velvet Underground album. He produced a Frank Zappa album. I think he produced maybe a Love album or something like that. Bob Dylan, I think, at one point. Everybody in the States. He took Sound of Silence and he added a folk rock group to the back of it, and it became a radio hit. And as a result, Simon Garfunkel got back together and then recorded this record.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like, because it wasn't supposed to happen. This was not supposed to exist.
Well, and I mean, if you think about it, like they basically broke up because they were overshadowed by the Beatles.
Yeah.
And then the reason they, returned was because, correct me if I'm wrong here, the Byrds covered a Beatles song, or wait, the Byrds covered Dylan's song and made like folk rock mainstream.
Yeah.
Electric folk rock, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And because of that, Tom Wilson overdubs one of their only songs from before that was semi-successful. And now they're back in it. It's sort of full circle, right?
Yeah. It's a really like weird circumstance. And I don't know if this is true, but I feel like somewhere I read that when they initially heard the cover, they like both hated it, but then it made them stars. So they were like, oh, okay, we sort of have to deal with it. We have to accept it. It's like not the cover, but you know what I mean? The new arrangement with with the musicians that they had never met.
It's kind of awesome.
So yeah, my issue with the record is that, and maybe I'm just spending way too much time thinking about the backstories, but it really does feel to me like it is this transparent attempt to like jump on the folk rock bandwagon. Like they're, it's sort of like almost all their songs. There's a couple that aren't, but almost all their songs are sort of arranged to get that same sound. But part of it also is that I'm not the world's biggest Paul Simon fan. That has something to do with it too.
And why is that?
I don't know. For some reason, I just don't. His lyrics don't connect with me like some other songwriters I really like. And I mean, I do like. Don't get me wrong. I like some of the songs here. I think "Sound of Silence" is a classic. So is "I Am a Rock." I quite liked "April Come She Will," and even though I initially didn't like Richard Cory, it really grew on me.
Yeah, same.
But on the other hand, I don't know how you feel about "We've Got a Groovy Thing Going," but to me, it's an abomination. It's fucking awful.
Why is it an abomination?
It sounds like this is what I think happened. The label guy or the producer said, "Paul Simon, please write me one of these like British pop songs where there's a chorus where there's one word repeated over and over again in the chorus, so that we'll have a hit with it." And Paul Simon's like, "Okay, fine, I'll do that." And he does it. And in this case, it's "No, no, no" or something like that. Mm-hmm. And instead of "Yeah, yeah, yeah." and then they're like, "Well, let's sing this," but they don't. They're folk singers. They don't sing like pop rock. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just being way too hard on them, but like it doesn't sound to me like they're actually singing it. Like they're harmonizing like folk singers on the song, and they shouldn't be. They should be like not shouting necessarily, but they should be singing with a little more like of a rock enthusiasm. Anyway, I don't know. I the first time I listened to it, I was like, ugh, and then every time afterwards, I was just like, no, it's not getting any better.
So it just seems a bit like cobbled together for you.
It feels like I really feel like someone was just like, please write us a like British invasion rock song hit for us, and Paul Simon grudgingly wrote it. I wouldn't be surprised if like in one of their biographies somewhere they're like, we hate this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also one of only two, I don't want to say original, but like new songs for this album, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did really enjoy "Somewhere They Can't Find Me."
Oh yeah.
How that like sort of, it has that little lick, like that little guitar lick, and then they did the song that it was sort of inspired by after, the acoustic song. Angie?
Yeah. That sequencing is neat.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge Simon Garfunkel fan. I'm not a huge Paul Simon fan. The thing for me is I was actually a big Simon Garfunkel fan when I was younger. But I'm less so now. And I don't know, It's not that and I should say, I should clarify, I don't feel the way I do about We've Got a Groovy Thing going about the rest of the album. I think the rest of the album's decent, and some of the songs are excellent.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that I just don't think it's fantastic, and I'm not really surprised that way, to be honest. But I don't know. I didn't feel like you did.
Well, I guess it's one of those classic albums that, again, I'd never really listened to front to back.
Yeah.
And, you only really hear half the songs from movies and soundtracks and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I mostly knew this from The Graduate.
Yeah, which is, again, another instance where some of these songs were reused, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you would never want to, like, invest in, the complete Simon Garfunkel discography, individual albums, because you'd have some of the songs like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
It's so funny. The world has changed so much in that way. Because, like, because of the lack of accessibility, it was perfectly reasonable to reissue, issue multiple albums with overlapping tracks to cover different markets and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that too, just in researching all of this, like how many, I guess, like B-sides and single versions, and they might have like 6 different versions of one song in a session.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's also, this is an incredibly short album. Is that realistic?
It's pretty common for the era, actually. Yeah. This was like, so most Beatles albums from the era are about 33, 34 minutes, so slightly longer than the UK version of this.
Mm-hmm.
The US version is shorter. The Beach Boys regularly released albums in the 25 to 30 minute range for the first, I don't know, their first like 6 or 8 albums, I think, are that short.
Maybe I know we've brought this up many times in the past, but it's probably just a limitation of like the vinyl format at that time.
I think it's partially that, and partially because the album had really only become the established way of presenting, the better way of presenting rock music since like Please Please Me came out, right? Like before that, before Please Please Me came out, not to spend too much time talking about the Beatles because I feel like I always do that, but before it came out, rock albums were mostly collections of previous singles with some additional tracks. So they put out like 3 singles over the course of a year or something. So a single and B-side each. You'd have like 6 tracks there, and then they get them to record another 4 to 6, and that would often, because of the songs were only 2.5 minutes long, that would often end up being only around half an hour.
Yeah.
So I think that's another reason.
Makes sense.
But yeah, it certainly, I'm not sure people wanted to push the format to its extremes, so they weren't sure what was going to happen.
Definitely. Yeah. I guess it's also because I've been listening to, I haven't been on the show in a while. So I haven't been listening to many classic albums, so I'm used to the longer stuff, I guess.
Yeah. I can't remember what I was listening to recently, but I was listening to an album, something released not that long ago, and because of this podcast, I was just like thinking like, God, this album is long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tend to listen to like weird post-rock albums too, so they usually, it might be 5 songs, but it's probably an hour and a half long.
Yeah. It's not too far off, I don't think.
Yeah. Cool. Any final thoughts on the Sounds of Silence, or should we just
move along to Pearl? Yeah.
I'm not sure if I have. Do you have a segue?
I do not have a segue. I don't know if there was ever any connection between Janis Joplin and Simon Garfunkel.
Okay.
No idea.
Me either. They were briefly alive for the same amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on that note,
did you know that Pearl was her second album?
No, I mean, I wasn't familiar with like her catalog. I know some of the songs on here, but I didn't realize it was a posthumous album.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'd forgotten that completely. I think I knew that before, but it completely slipped my mind.
yeah, and I mean, I'll get to it later when we talk about Mercedes Benz, but it's kind of a cool story there too. Um, but yeah, I mean, just touching on the limitations of a format before, it's cool that uh, Pearl was actually released in 4-channel quadraphonic format, which I didn't even know was a thing,
Yeah,
especially in 1971.
it was a weird. Um, I I had something that was like a weird. I used to have a CD. I can't remember which CD it was. That was some weird format. It wasn't 4-channel quadraphonic, but same kind of thing. Was a format that people had briefly tried out and had just been like just disappeared, and I could never figure out what the hell, like why this one CD looked different than all other CDs.
Was it a Super Audio CD or something?
It was gold.
Oh yeah, remember we were talking about this a while back?
Oh, did we? Okay.
How gold CDs are going to be the new vinyl?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I had forgotten, but yeah, that's I mean, I had a gold CD. I think I probably still have it actually. And I was only one I've ever seen.
And did it
And it was supposed to
sound
be superior, not degrade as fast or something, I think.
interesting? Other than that, that 100-year shelf life of the normal CD.
Yeah, exactly. It was a real problem that needed solving back in the early 90s or whatever it was.
All right.
So I had no idea that this was her second album because I if I knew about I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again Mama, I forgot that it existed. And I don't know that it's when I look at the track list of that, I haven't heard too many of those songs from her on the radio. So I don't know why it's sort of been forgotten, but like when I think of Janis Joplin, I think of this record and the Big Brother and the Holding Company record.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why. Maybe there's that other one's a lost classic. I don't know, but like this is always. I mean, this one, my neighbor across the hall in first year used to play Pearl all the time, which is probably the first time I really like paid attention to her more than just the fact that she was occasionally on the oldies radio I used to listen to as a kid.
Yeah. No, this one definitely impressed me, and there's a whole like I guess Canadian bent to this, right? Like a lot of this was recorded on stage during the Festival Express tour.
Yeah, have you seen the movie?
I've seen clips from it. I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's so long ago that I saw it that I don't really know that I could
Do you
remember
care
it
to
well
explain
enough.
what Festival Express is for all the people out there who aren't listening to
It
us?
was this crazy idea of this tour across Canada that was like they basically put a whole bunch of um, popular rock bands. I just actually went to it. So it was The Dead, Joplin, the band. For some reason, Buddy Guy was there, which is weird. The Flying Burrito Brothers, which I would just like to say that's awesome because I can't wait until we get to a Flying Burrito Brothers record because I'm a big fan. But they're very obscure compared to the other people mentioned. And
Yeah.
then also another weird one is Delaney and Bonnie, who are more famous for having Eric Clapton tour with them once than they are for any music they put out, I think. And yeah, they I believe they didn't make it all the way across the country. They were supposed to tour the then major cities of Canada. And yeah, they ended up not. I'm looking at it now. They ended up only playing 3 shows in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Calgary, and it was basically a giant fiasco. In part because they put all these drug users on a train together. And so what did they do? They got high all the time and jammed. And it's been years since I've seen the movie, but I do remember the movie was fascinating because, first of all, you know who all the people are in it, or a lot of them. If you're a music fan, you've seen all these people before, and a number of them are dead now. And they're very visibly under the influence in many cases. And
it's like The Last Waltz, right?
Yeah. It's like the last waltz on a train. A little bit.
Train run by cocaine and unencumbered sexuality.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, that's what Festival Express was. And I don't know. I think it provided they were like not stoned out of their minds. I feel like the Toronto show may have been cool. But I don't know. I don't remember whether the concert footage is any good or not.
I would have loved to have been at the Winnipeg show with 4,600 people.
Yeah, you could have got right up close, eh? There's so few people at it. I always like find that stuff fascinating in retrospect when like bands that are famous now did shows where like people were just like, I don't care.
Well, who plans a tour? And the only stops are Toronto, Winnipeg, and Calgary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in fairness, it was supposed to also be in Vancouver and Montreal. It's just, I can't remember what happened. I think maybe the Montreal show never. Oh yeah, it was canceled.
They changed dates and then they canceled it. But that would have been insane. Them in Montreal on Saint Jean Baptiste Day.
Yeah. And then by the time they got, my memory was by the time they were on their way to Vancouver, Vancouver show got canceled, but it got canceled way before that. So, yeah, a 3-date tour on a train, and you've got the Grateful Dead on it,
and you can get a 2-day pass in Toronto for $14.
Also related to this and not related to Pearl is so I have this album by Thelonious Monk featuring John Coltrane briefly played with Thelonious Monk in I think it was 1959 for part of a year, and they one of the things they did is they did a stay at Carnegie Hall. And the tickets to that show were $250 each.
Oh man!
And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Oh, inflation. Anyway, I always I hear that. I'm like, what? Who would not pay $250 to go see Coltrane? Anyway,
imagine if you had a ticket and you didn't go.
Yeah, that would be. I don't know. I would have a hard time forgiving myself for that. A really hard time.
Anyway, back to Pearl.
Yeah, this is, like I said, I feel like this is, along with the Big Brother and the Holding Company album, this is like the definitive Janis Joplin record. I mean, I think most people have probably heard Me and Bobby McGee. If you've ever listened to like classic rock or oldies radio, you've heard her version of it, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like, and I don't know about you, but I feel like it's the definitive version. Like, there's not really, I've never heard another version of it where I was like, oh, I like this better.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely the definitive version. I didn't realize it was written by Chris Christopherson.
Yep. It was I think it was his first ever hit as a songwriter.
Wow.
I think it made him, in fact, I believe. Like, he was not, I think he was an unknown songwriter before it. Before he had a hit with it. I could be wrong. Because that was back in the day when people still tried. Well, I guess I say that, and it is happening as we speak, that people make their livings as songwriters, not performers.
Usually only people from Scandinavia, though.
Yeah, that's true.
But that could be a whole show right there.
Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. He had already been successful within. Other people have been successful with his songs.
Yeah, because he did some He had some Johnny Cash stuff, right?
Probably. It says Roger Miller covered Jerry Lee Lewis once he had gone country, and then a bunch of country artists I've never heard of: Billy Walker, Roy Dresky, Ray Stevens, Farron Young. Don't know who any of these people are. And then also Waylon Jennings later did him. Yeah, you're right. Johnny Cash did one, but that was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And Joplin apparently dated him, and that's why she knew the song.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, it seems like, anyway, it was his biggest hit to date, if it wasn't his first hit.
Yeah, and arguably probably one of his biggest hits ever.
Yeah, I would assume.
I mean, he's probably still getting royalties.
Yep. Because it was a pretty huge hit, I think.
I believe so.
I don't know. I can't see it. It was a #1 single, but it doesn't say it. For some reason, Wikipedia has like the chart position of the Roger Miller version, but not the Janis Joplin version.
Yeah, it is incredibly inconsistent that way sometimes.
It's like, oh yeah, we care about the semi-country hit that Roger Miller had.
Well, right. There's probably one guy that edits every Roger Miller reference on Wikipedia.
Oh yeah. I think you're probably 100% right about that. But yeah, I mean the song choices are good. I think they suit her very well. Her two like songs she either wrote or co-wrote are good. I think Mercedes-Benz is fantastic.
Yeah, and do you want me to give you some history of that Mercedes-Benz?
Sure.
So apparently she was just at a poetry slam in Port Chester, New York, and it was between her and Bob Newirth, who we'll use to transition later, and it was some sort of like tongue-in-cheek prayer for a sports car, a TV, and a night on the town, and then. I think she just like pulled it out in the studio when she was there in October and died 3 days later. It was the last thing she ever recorded.
That's crazy. I did not know that. That makes it a little more poignant.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to it, it sort of makes sense. Like she was definitely high.
Yeah. But it's a very despite that, I think the performance is incredible.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I don't know. I mean, I'd heard it a number of times back when my neighbor in residence used to listen to this album all the time, but I'd forgotten about the song actually. Until we were listening to this again.
It's definitely one of those songs where you would never think of it, but as soon as you hear it, you remember it.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredible too, like the sense of rhythm it has for an acapella song.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like a knee slapper of an acapella song, if such a thing exists.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a great song. And I think the other choices on the I don't know if this is probably a weird thing to say, but I've always sort of thought of her as like the first for me, she's like the greatest female rock singer ever. Because I really don't know of too many. I mean, who else can you really think of that sings like actual like rock music as opposed to like pop music or folk music?
I would say Grace Slick would be number 2 for me.
Yeah, Grace Slick is like the only other person that even pops into my head when I say that. And the thing to me that like makes her so compelling, and again, this may be a weird thing to say, is that I feel like this is like the moment when like a white woman sang like a black man and like made it okay, for women to sort of to sing like men. Specifically, you know, because I feel like women, a lot of women, a lot of white women anyway, because I feel like maybe that's this isn't really true of, say, Aretha Franklin. Um, they had to sing in a certain like restrained style, you know, that fit their position as women.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes along and it's just like, you know, leaves everything on the table, especially on a Mercedes Benz, where it's just like, you know, you have no doubt that this is like, she is 100% committed to her performance.
Definitely, yeah.
In a way that I don't know that too many other female singers, especially from the era, white female singers, you would ever say that about. That there was always more emphasis on you know, singing as a woman should sing. I guess I've always felt that way. I don't know if other people do, but and so like, and what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that I feel like the choices of the songs here are they're well suited to her and her, like, you know, intensity, or for lack of a better word,
And her incredible range too.
yeah.
Yeah, and so do
Sorry.
you think she was the first one to sing with that like fervor because she was high all the time?
I have no idea. It may have helped. I don't know. I do know there's a lot of stuff out there about her substance problems. I think, like, books about her, biographies, and I know there's more than one movie that at least partially focuses on her. So there's probably a lot of that in there. I do believe I saw something once where it was talking about that she didn't have a very good childhood, I believe. Like, it may have been some abuse or something in there. Like, not necessarily sexual, but like violence, I think.
Okay.
And that, like, singing and going away to California was sort of, because she's from Texas, right? I believe she was from Texas. Yeah, she's from Texas, and she like ran away to California. No, maybe she wasn't beaten, but I thought she had been beaten.
God. Let's just scratch that.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, if there's one way that you're gonna, you know, smash the preconceived notion of what a female singer can be, it's because you're, you know, blasted out of your face on cocaine and you don't give a shit.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not saying
I'm
that
sure.
she always was, but I mean, that's the way she's portrayed in the media.
Yeah, that's true. And she did, like, I guess, regardless of what happened to her, I think I was way off base with the really bad childhood, but it does seem like she had a childhood. She was unhappy, and so she found her happiness in, you know, this music that was not, like, it was okay. It was starting to be okay for, like, for young men to find, you know, happiness in this music, but I think for her it was probably not all right. And yeah, maybe that had a reason, something to do with the drugs, and like you said, maybe it had something to do with freeing her up to make her, because again, like, I can't imagine that anyone in the community she grew up in thought this was a good thing for her to be doing back then.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, can you imagine, like, a you know, a white girl going to her parents in Texas in the 1950s and 60s saying, like, oh, I want to grow up to be a blues singer?
no,
What?
that wouldn't even fly in Texas today.
Yeah.
Sorry if there's any Texans listening. I'm sure there aren't. It's okay.
The one thing, though, that's weird is, why is there an instrumental on the album? I don't understand.
Because she died before they recorded the vocals.
Oh, okay, that makes way more sense.
But she'd already approved the instrumental, so they just left it.
Okay. It does seem like a weird thing to include, but
yeah. But I mean, maybe it was like, you know, not her last wish, but because it was something she approved probably that close to her death, they felt the need to leave it on, which I think is fine.
Yeah. And it's better than what they would do nowadays, which is they'd try to find some unrelated vocal track and
or they'd get a hologram to perform it at Coachella or something. I'm sure that's coming. That'll be the next. It'll be Festival Express, the Oculus Rift edition. There's a free startup idea for anyone.
Yeah, so you have a segue to the next album from here.
Yeah, so I mean Mercedes-Benz, which is co-credited to Bob Newirth. He's also featured. He was also influential in forming Bob Dylan's backing band for Desire, and I think for some subsequent albums. You're the Dylan expert, but
it's the Rolling Thunder Review. So it was like this large band that Dylan assembled. That they actually started touring before Desire was made, and they recorded one of the reasons why Desire sounds nothing like very different from a lot of other Dylan albums is because they were present. And he toured with them for a while. I don't know how many dates. It was a number of dates. I would say it looks like 30 or 40 throughout the United States and into Canada. And it was like Dylan wanted to like change it up after Blood on the Tracks, and so he one of the things he did was he toured and recorded with a larger band than he'd never done before, which caused all sorts of issues. One of which was that apparently he was uncomfortable with the large band, which is hilarious.
Well, and it sounds like
his idea.
He was hanging out with Patti Smith in Greenwich Village, and he essentially became jealous of the quality of her backing band.
Yep. That's exactly what I've heard too. And then he got some help, and he also like picked like random people off the street. I believe the fiddle player on Desire was picked off the street. Awesome. Which, I mean, she sounds good. So,
Clapton was even in the studio for a bit of this.
Yeah. There was a million people.
Players.
There was a million. Yeah, well, that's not that weird. For one of the things about Dylan is that like he, in a number of cases, he'll record songs twice. Mm-hmm. Like he'll record with one band and then, or used to do this anyway, record with one band and be like, oh, I didn't like this. So then he would go record. And so then on the credits, because they'll use like one recording from one session and one recording for the other, it will credit multiple guitarists, multiple bassists, etc., because they use the different sessions. But in this case, there was just a lot of people present.
Yeah, because it sounds like a lot of those sessions didn't work, and they ended up just going with, the majority of the Rolling Thunder Review.
Yeah. Well, yeah, some of the Rolling Thunder Review. I think there's a significant. There were more people on the Rolling Thunder Review, I believe, than present on Desire, because it was a big like. I don't know how many people were on it, but there were a lot of people at times on the tour.
Right. Including
like guests.
Yeah, Joni Mitchell and stuff, right?
Yeah. Joan Baez, Roger McGuinn of the Byrds. Apparently segue. I don't know that I'll remember it, but so apparently he at one point he invited Mick Ronson, who had been David Bowie's lead guitarist, to join them as well. So like just everybody who he ran into apparently just like come play on my tour.
He's wandering around.
I've heard very mixed things about those shows. Some people I think regard them as classics, and some of the people are like think of them as awful. I've never seen any of them, so I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a weird period in his life because his marriage had fallen apart, which I mean is just in the like one song on the album that's I'm not co-written. Well, sorry, I guess I should go into like why this is a weird Bob Dylan album.
Okay, let's go back to the start.
Yeah, so this is a weird Bob Dylan album from lots of reasons. One of the reasons being that the um, I would say the greatest English language songwriter that I'm aware of decided that he needed a co-writer, and so worked with a co-writer for the first time in his career. I don't know that it was. I don't think it was the last, but it was the first time.
This is Jacques Levy.
Yeah, and he was a playwright, I believe. And one of the interesting things is it's a return in some cases. It's a return to like protest songs, which he hadn't recorded since like 1964 or 65, I guess. So that was also weird. Now there's only two of them really, but still the fact that he was doing that again was different because he hadn't been doing that at all for years and years.
Yeah. And, I mean, they are also the two longest songs on the record.
Yes. And we probably want to talk about them at least a little bit. And then there's also, the presence, for example, the prominent fiddle parts. Like, I don't know that he'd ever worked with a fiddle player before. Like I said, I think he picked her off the street.
Mm-hmm. And by fiddle, you mean violin. I mean, it's essentially the same thing, right?
Yeah. Sorry. Is it it's credited as a violin. Sorry. Sounds like a fiddle.
It does.
It's just the tuning's different, right? I think that's the only difference.
Yeah. When does a violin become a fiddle?
I believe it's solely a tuning thing, but I could be completely wrong.
Also whiskey.
Yeah, I think that might actually be the definitive quality. Has the player been drinking?
Are you in Ireland?
And the other thing is he had been doing it a little bit before, but backing vocalist or almost co-lead vocalist at times in Emmylou Harris, who we talked about last year. This is after that album, but this actually brought her to the attention of people outside of the country music world. I think it was a fairly big deal for her. And so that was another thing. So there were various things that he did that were not normal practice for him. And there is, disagreement about this record, but I think a lot of people sort of view it as maybe the last great Bob Dylan album. Because I haven't, and I can't really speak to this because this is where all the guides out there tell you to stop. Okay. This one, but basically at some point after this, he became a devout Christian and started doing very, very weird things, and then the 80s happened, and I mean I don't think anybody really pays any attention to anything Dylan did in the 80s. I think it's been wiped clean, to my knowledge. There's basically there's this giant gap in terms of when people tell you what to listen to with Dylan. There's a huge gap between Desire and like the records he's been putting out over the last 10 years.
Really?
Yeah. Now there may be all sorts of hidden gems in there, but I've never actually bothered to find out because everything you read, pretty much, at least when I was first getting into him, which was a long time ago now, so things may have changed, was like, there's this giant hole that you shouldn't bother going down, because it's, he did become whether he pretended to or not is a whole other story, but apparently he became a devout Christian, and if you look up the ratings of most of his records between 1976 and I don't know late 90s, they're not good. Now, whether or not that means they're good is a whole other story, but
I'm sure they're not.
Yeah. So yeah,
this one is good.
Yeah. It's despite despite or maybe because of how unique it is, it's a pretty great album. I mean, I think it sort of suffers in comparison with Blood on the Tracks, which is considered by a lot of people to be one of his 2 or 3 best records. And that was the one that came out before this. But I mean, this is
before the basement tapes are right before this, though, right?
Yeah, but that was a release of old recordings.
Right.
Basement tapes were recorded in '67.
Cool.
And then they were put out in '75.
Okay.
And some people will tell you that they were also heavily the official version is heavily skewed towards the band rather than Dylan.
Right.
And that a lot of the Dylan, because it was released as a bootleg originally, called The Great White Wonder, and that apparently has a lot more Dylan lead vocals than band lead vocals. But I don't know if that's true. I've only ever listened to Basement Tapes and not The Great White Wonder, because I don't know where you would get that in this day and age.
True. Well, there's a Basement Tapes box set that was just released that has, I think, like a comprehensive.
Oh
release.
Dear, I may have to go find that. But just as an aside, the Basement Tapes are great. If you should check them out if you don't know anything about them, they're fantastic.
Okay.
But yeah, so his last studio album before this was new studio album was Blood on the Tracks, which was, according to everybody but him, was about the dissolution of his marriage, and according to Bob Dylan, was supposedly about Chekhov, based on Chekhov's short stories.
Okay.
Which is, a very typically Dylan thing to say.
Yeah.
This thing is very obviously about something. It's like, no, it's not. You're all idiots. Okay. Anyway, so the reason that's important, I think, is because it probably was an extremely it's a breakup album, and it was probably really hard. And so then he went and he put together this thing that, like I said earlier, had 2 protest songs on it, and it's got these other songs that are more. They sort of flirt with vaguely world music-y melodies and
instrumentation too. There's congas, there's bouzouki, which I would guess was a pretty extravagant instrument for this time in mainstream music.
I think particularly for Bob Dylan, yeah.
Yeah, you can tell he was in Greenwich Village, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of the songs are classics, like Hurricane is, I think, it is an absolute classic, I think, and it's probably one of the few true crime songs, that
I know.
actually...
I was thinking that, especially with all the publicity these days with true crime podcasts and Netflix series, right?
If you loved Making a Murderer, listen to Hurricane.
And then
it's less depressing because then you can look him up afterwards and learn that he got out of jail.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry. I just ruined the song for everybody.
And his name is Stephen Avery.
So that's there. How do you feel about Joey?
It's too long, but
it's way too long. Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree with his assessment of Crazy Joe Gallo either, but
yeah, don't if you enjoy Joey, whatever you do not actually look up the real Joey, because you will suddenly Bob Dylan, why are you defending this guy?
Yeah, do you have any insight there? Why was he defending this guy?
I have no fucking idea. I have no idea.
Maybe he's just trying to be contrarian. I don't know.
Yeah, that's as good a guess as any, I think. Because I do feel like there's a strong contrarian streak in Bob Dylan.
I like the Reuben Carter thing. I get it.
It makes perfect sense, yeah.
And it was, a really long, as Ricky on Trailer Park Boys would say, a toe to sew. He was very much at the forefront of him getting out of jail too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could much like you could say about the famous movie A Thin Blue Line. It's the first movie to ever get some conviction overturned. You could say like Hurricane is the first ever popular music song, or probably that had a hand in overturning someone's conviction.
Yeah.
You know, like it. I mean, a lot of people heard this song and probably got involved in the case because they heard the song, not because they read about it somewhere.
Yeah. I will say though, it does come off a little dated when he drops the N-bomb in it.
Yeah. That's true.
And again, I mean, that's him being sensationalist, I guess, but still.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, it was a different world too, right? Like it may not have been so sensationalist in 1976. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Neither of us were alive, so we're not sure. And there's some other classics, like One More Cup of Coffee is a classic, I think. And I can't say, I don't know why I feel this way, but I don't know about you, but I find Sarah absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
That song plays and I'm just and the thing is, like, I can't actually relate to it. I never wrote, any woman I was in love with any songs. I can't write songs. So I can't like relate to the descriptions of things. So I don't know what it is, but like I guess maybe it's his honesty, is that it wasn't even on Blood on the Tracks, where it's like clearly about him and Sarah's breakup. It's he is sort of hiding behind, well, he didn't say either of their names, and it's raw and emotional, but you could conceivably say, oh well, this isn't actually about this stuff. Whereas like this is, I mean, it's named after his wife. It's clearly about his wife, and I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's one of the, I guess, the only solo written songs on the album, that and One More Cup of Coffee.
Yeah.
And,
well, with good reason.
Yeah. And it's the last song on the record, right? So,
yep.
I mean, it's the last song for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And apparently she was there during the recording, which is like really weird.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was his like last, like, okay, I'm going to sing this song for you one last time to try and save the marriage or something. I don't know.
Or maybe it's him letting go.
Yeah. I don't know.
Who knows?
Anyway, yeah, it's I don't know. I find it devastating. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. So to me, that one's also a classic.
Yeah, I have to listen to this some more, but I think this is the Bowie, because we've listened to a few Dylan albums so far in the last year. I think this is the one I've probably enjoyed the most.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, it does sound more modern than a lot of the 60s ones, for sure.
Well, yeah, and I think I like the varied like musical influences, and you can tell that he had played with the band for a while too, just in the way these songs are written, the feel.
Yeah. And he definitely, he was going through a weird period, where in the early 70s he was at his most musically diverse, and this album too is sort of the late 70s now, but a couple of his other 70s records are more musically diverse, and then he sort of went back to just doing his thing. Whereas in the 60s he was pretty much, he was first just a folk singer, and then it was rock and roll, but it wasn't really too much else. So it's definitely more varied musically than most of his albums. It's a good entry point, I think. If you're going to get into Bob Dylan, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, start and go back, not forward, people. Yeah. Not forward.
Yeah. Because I don't know anything about Hard Rain, but everyone seems to hate Hard Rain, which is the record after this.
So I think what we should start doing, which I think we tend to review albums that are generally quite good.
Yeah.
Except for Emotional Rescue, which is awful.
Yeah.
Maybe we should start intentionally reviewing bad ones too.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, listen, Hard Rain's coming up in September.
All right. Get ready. It's gonna rain.
And and then I don't know, like you could hear him redo Maggie's Farm.
Yay.
Oh, and Oh Sister. No wonder people didn't like it. I'm looking at the track listing. Oh Sister is repeated. He did a second version of Oh Sister for Hard Rain. What the hell was he doing? Like track 5 here on Desire?
Yeah.
It's a cover. He did a cover version. Everyone hates it because he did his own. He covered himself.
What?
It's 9 songs. Yeah, I didn't realize it, but yeah, he covered himself.
That's the most masturbatory thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. And then, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know if we even want to. I don't know if we want to go down that road.
All right. Well, for everyone listening, you just witnessed a production meeting, and then there will be no Hard Rain.
Yeah, probably not. Anyway, I had no idea that was what it is. I just started reading the track list and I was like, what? And I realized all of them were. Yeah, but that is something we should think about and maybe not talk about while we're recording.
No, whatever. I like it. I thought it was interesting too that Mozambique started out as just a way to see how many rhymes there were for eek. It's very deep.
Yeah. It does feel like, I wonder if he was not necessarily just on this record, but he was getting like bored and doing other things because he made it. I mean, the way he wrote lyrics in the 60s, there was like, he opened up a can of worms and there was no going back, right? It was like, okay, now all these poetic techniques that no one has used before are now available to everyone.
Yeah.
And you sometimes wonder if, especially when, and you got a million people telling you that you're incredible, it must be difficult to like find new ways of expressing yourself. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're the innovator, you basically you have to change yourself every album, or you're going to stagnate, right?
Yep.
And on that note,
yeah. Speaking of innovators, the last album we're talking about today is David Bowie's 10th, Station to Station, the follow-up to Young Americans, which we talked about last spring, I believe. This is a personal favorite of mine. How do you feel about it?
It's great. I love it. They say like this is sort of like the gateway to the Berlin trilogy, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like halfway. It's halfway between Young Americans and the Berlin trilogy. But despite that, I actually like it more. I mean, I would say, if you're like putting a gun to my head and like asking like, which is the more important record, I'm going to say probably one of the Berlin records, but like this, I enjoy this more. This is like in my top 3 favorite David Bowie albums. And I don't know, I'm a huge fan of the title track. I'm a huge fan of pretty much every song on here, and the only one I don't really like is Golden Years, and the only reason is because it's been played to death. I feel like I've heard it 18 million times, but it's kind of a great song. Yeah, it's a great song. I'm not like, it's just like it, it's been used in so many movies and I heard it on the radio so many times that it's just like I don't need to hear it again, but it's good. But it's I love everything else. Like I love all the other 5 songs. Yeah, and I mean, kind of, playing on the theme of drug-addled artists, this is him at his most like fucked up, for lack of a better word. No, he was an absolute. He was a mess, and he sort of used that to his artistic advantage. Like he I don't know how much of it was a creation. He claims to have created a character about that. Of course, it might have just been him because he was really, really He was a mess. He was not leaving the house. He was doing drugs endlessly.
Well, listen to this. So they fueled by an astronomical, in quotes, cocaine habit and subsisting on a diet of peppers and milk. He spent much of 1975 and 1976 in a state of psychic terror. Stories mostly from one interview, pieces of which found their way into Playboy and Rolling Stone, circulated of the singer living in a house full of ancient Egyptian artifacts, burning black candles, seeing bodies fall past his window, having his semen stolen by witches. I can't make this shit up. Retrieving secret messages from the Rolling Stones, and living in morbid fear of Aleister Crowley aficionado Jimmy Page.
My favorite part is the last part of that.
Yeah.
It was like, Jimmy Page is coming to kill me.
He would later say of LA, this fucking place should be wiped off the face of the earth. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And have you read anything about TVC 15, the fourth song on the album?
No.
Well, apparently one time he and Iggy Pop were hanging out, because this is right before they started collaborating on Iggy Pop's records, like right before they moved to Berlin and started recording together. Yeah. And right after David Bowie, or right during the point where David Bowie had mixed Raw Power. No, it was after David Bowie mixed Raw Power for the Stooges. And they were like hanging out, and like Iggy thought like the TV was going to eat his girlfriend or something, and so David Bowie wrote a song about it. That's what TVC 15 is about. A TV that's going to eat a girlfriend. It's just like, what was going on?
Well, I mean, cocaine and peppers and milk, that's what was going on.
Yeah.
I don't know where he bought his groceries, but it's great.
But the crazy thing is that a man that utterly messed up could like create this album. I have no idea.
And then live for 40 more years.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, this really is. I mean, it is, like I said, it's one of my 3 favorite David Bowie records. It's also, I think, it may not be like among his very, very best albums, because David Bowie, I think personally, is a very high standard for what is his very best work. But it's still like, it's really, really strong. It combines the like, the R&B and soul music he was getting into with Young Americans, with some, kind of out there musical ideas. I mean, this album opens with his longest song ever. It opens with a 10-minute, essentially like a vamp on 2 different riffs, basically. And there's I don't know. I'm kind of in awe of it a little bit. I guess I can't really be objective about it because I like it too much.
Yeah. And I mean, he's obviously been elevated to a whole other, like, I guess, like the stratosphere in the last few weeks.
Yeah. Which we should mention, because this is our first podcast since David Bowie died. And I don't know about you, but I am a very, very big David Bowie fan. And I was, like everybody, I think, well, a lot of people, at least a lot of people in my social media feed, I was, it's upsetting because you forget sometimes. I don't know if we all do this, but I forget that like these people are mortal because their music isn't, and you sort of figure they'll be around forever. And he's younger than all but one of my 4 parents. He was younger than all but one of them, which also is a reminder of mortality in general, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was, like, for me anyway, he's one of my I guess probably one of my favorite musicians of all time.
And you had, I guess on one of the previous episodes, you'd also done a Bowie album, right?
Yeah,
Like right
we
before?
Evan and I talked about Scary Monsters, which is one of my other 3 favorite David Bowie albums. And then I can't remember if this was in one of the ones that got messed up, but I also talked about Man Who Sold the World, because that was also an anniversary, which is also a good one. It's not among his very best, but it's a good one. It's a weird one because it's like the David Bowie hard rock album,
Right.
which is odd. But it wasn't odd at the time because no one had heard of him. But I don't know. Were you a fan of the level that I am? Or probably not. I don't know.
No, I mean, I know we've touched on this a bunch of times. Like I grew up not really, like my parents didn't listen to a lot of this kind of music.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably would on the radio or whatever, but I don't think these records weren't in my house,
Yeah.
So it was what I heard, whatever was on the radio, and probably didn't really even understand it at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this record's awesome. Especially like in context in 1976, like this definitely led into what, like, post-punk and kind of like weird fusion of krautrock and whatever, right?
Well, who was making like arty soul music? I mean, lots of people were making soul music, but like this deliberately artsy fartsy, like mixing sort of. I mean, I was sort of thinking, one of the things about like young Americans, I like young Americans more than I used to. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really sound like a David Bowie album in the way that like this does. Like this is weird enough and theatrical enough that it really does sound a lot like David Bowie. And it's sort of like it's a unique beast in a way, because it's like, who I don't know who else was like doing this. It's a weird sort of fusion of 2 different worlds, of this sort of like British art rock and this,
Yeah, I mean, I think without this record there would be no Joy Division.
Whoa, I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know. That's a bold statement. It's interesting because it had to come from somewhere, though. I think I think this record and all of David Bowie's like over from this era rather, like the Berlin trilogy as well, particularly.
Yeah, of course. Maybe I'm
impact on post-punk and Joy Division in particular. I mean, I don't know if you you probably know this, but I don't know if other people know this. Joy Division's original name was Warsaw, and that was named after a David Bowie song called Warsawa, or I'm sure I'm butchering it because I can't speak Polish. But yeah, named out like the Polish name for Warsaw. And yeah, so yeah, they definitely, I'm sure they listen to this and the later ones as well. But yeah, it is one of the missing links between like, British art rock and post-punk, because like most British art rock wasn't funky in any way, shape, or form, and yet post-punk, which is sort of like the next step in British art rock, is very funky in a weird sort of mechanical and I guess Bowie-esque kind of way. Yeah. I'm talking myself into your argument.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like this, without this, we wouldn't have the Berlin trilogy.
Yeah,
you wouldn't. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. I've talked myself into it. So
yes.
I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about it? I can't. I just think it's fantastic. So
yeah, and I'm just still worried about him getting his semen stolen by witches.
Yeah, I can't. I am not. I mean, I don't know. We shouldn't go down that road. I was gonna say I have never used cocaine, but but I can't even. I don't understand how, like, I guess you don't start using cocaine on the knowledge that it's gonna make you think that. You wouldn't know you were going that way. But like that, none of that sounds in any way appealing. It all sounds awful.
Well, I think it's probably one of those things that once you're in there, it's hard to get out, and you don't really know how you got in there in the first place.
Well,
right?
he has a famous line about saying like, I fled like the cocaine den of the world for the heroin den of the world, but fortunately I didn't like heroin, so it worked out because he went to Berlin, right? Which is at the time, I guess, was where you went to get good heroin.
Oh. Well, I just like that. Apparently, he doesn't even like remember even like producing this album. Like that's how fucked up he was.
Yeah, it's you would expect the thing to be a giant disaster as a result,
Yeah.
But
that just speaks to Bowie.
Yeah, I guess it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, do we want to touch on his? He was criticized for being a bit of a, I don't know, I don't want to say a Nazi sympathizer, but he was pretty fascinated with Nazi memorabilia at the time, and he blamed it on his persona.
I mean, he clearly he was taking inspiration. I mean, it's not the first time that he took inspiration from some sort of risque places, but he was definitely I think that a big part of his popular success, one of the reasons why he was maybe more popularly successful than other people who were doing as creative things, and part of it is just who he is, or was rather. He was very he's a great songwriter, but I think part of it was he was a bit of a provocateur, and it was also, I mean, if he doesn't even remember recording this, who the hell knows where his mind was? In that sense, he probably didn't really get that he was, or he maybe he understood that he was crossing boundaries, but didn't realize that that was a boundary that a lot of people didn't want him to flirt with.
Yeah. It could also be revisionist history, right?
Yeah, and the thing is like what outrages one generation doesn't necessarily outrage another generation.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you learn about, sort of that whole thing, the more you learn about people, the more you find out, famous people, the more you find out they are actually people and they have skeletons in their closet that aren't necessarily awesome. I mean, if among the worst things you've ever done in your life is taking a weird interest in Nazism while you were coked out of your mind, I don't know that it's that bad.
It worked for Lemmy, right?
That's true. His like, oh man, that his memorabilia collection is creepy and messed up. But anyway,
functional tank.
Yeah.
Well, had.
Yes, had. Yeah, it was right before I recorded the episode about Ace of Spades. He died.
Wow.
Like right before.
So maybe this is like the no cultural authority curse.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on. So watch out, Bob Dylan and Paul Simon.
Okay.
And
you heard it here first.
Should we do final thoughts or?
Yeah, it's been like an hour and a half.
Oh God. Okay. So final thoughts on Sounds of Silence for you.
This was way better than I thought it would be. Like I was really impressed with this. I'm gonna listen to Simon. I'm a fan of Simon and Garfunkel. These are not words that I ever thought would come out of my mouth.
I will not be listening to this again, probably. I feel like I don't know. There's other things I can listen to. But I really like some of it. Let's put it that way. I really like some of it.
Okay. One for the mixtape.
Yeah. Pearl.
Awesome. I mean, I'd say this is like, I don't know if you would say like the landmark Joplin album.
I think so. I mean, I haven't listened to Big Brother in a long time. But this is like more her baby, I feel like, because Big Brother, she was just the singer, right?
Yeah. I think it's like the perfect example of like burnout, don't fade away, right?
Yep. Yep. And I'm sure that maybe crossed his mind when he was writing that song. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Desire.
Again, yeah, I think this is the best Dylan album I've listened to on this podcast for sure. I know you would disagree, but it's the most up my alley, the most varied. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
I really like it. I get like obsessed with like history and things, place in history. So, I mean, I'm more partial to like his recordings from like 65 and 66, but which, oh, by the way, we get to listen to Blonde on Blonde in a few months, which is super exciting for me, because that's like the Bob Dylan album. But yeah, this is a great one, and I do think it's a great place to start if you're gonna be like, I know Bob Dylan, I've heard of Bob Dylan, I've never really listened to one of his albums all the way through. I think this is a good place to start.
I totally agree. The most accessible Dylan. And Station to Station.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite David Bowie records. It's one of my favorite albums from the 70s, probably. And yeah, it's in my mind, it's an absolute classic. And also, actually, since we're talking about it, places to start, I think if you're going to get into if you want to get into late 70s David Bowie, this would be absolutely the album to start with, more than any of the others, for sure.
I fully agree. Just don't let the witches steal your semen.
Because who knows?
I keep reading that line over and over.
All right. That was another episode, our first episode of 2016. It's exciting. I've been Riley.
And I have been Phil.
Thanks for listening.
Later.